Hello. So my name's Jim Carafano. I am I oversee the foreign defense policy at the Heritage Foundation, and I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Nancy Lindborg, Andrew Wilder, and Moeed Yosef for co-sponsoring this very special event with us from the Heritage Foundation. In fact, this is the third major South Asia event we've co-hosted with the Institute of Peace, and I particularly want to thank Lisa Curtis, who's been a great partner in working with the Institute. I'm a huge fan of the Institute. We just had an event here 2 weeks ago where we symbolized the passing of the guard from the previous national security team and team to the new team, and I think it's just reflective of the kinds of very special things that USIP does in terms of bringing people together to talk about important things. We did a program with them on Afghanistan 2013. We did a tremendous program with them on Sri Lanka last year, which is a country that doesn't get enough attention in the United States, and maybe a country being cursed with getting too much attention in the United States. We're happy to do a program on Pakistan. The U.S.-Pakistan relation is multifaceted, and I think one of the things I most enjoy about working with USIP and about our joint program is it's not just about countering terrorism, but it's about this desire among all of us to really grow that relationship on the economic, political, diplomatic level, and not just on the national security issues. And we share common interests and goal, and especially seeing Pakistan prosper and develop into a stable democracy free of terrorism and extremism. We are encouraged by Pakistan's first ever peaceful transfer of power from one elected government to another. And Lisa and I had an opportunity to be in Islamabad last year and talk with a lot of the public officials about the state of civil society and politics, and we are hopeful that this is the new norm. This is why, and it's fitting, to hear an address today from Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. The Pakistan People's Party has been at the forefront of the democratic movement in Pakistan. And I don't only think it's a truism that's recognized here in the United States. And I think you have a great deal of admiration of people here for that. And you have been steadfast behind democratic liberal values like freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and a strong judiciary. Your leaders have fought against extremist trends in the country. Your mother paid for her life when she was assassinated by extremists in 2007, as she bravely fought to bring democracy back to her country. More recently, Pakistan has taken on this extremist threat in military operations in the tribal areas, and with the adoption of the National Action Plan, working more consciously to eliminate terrorism. This has helped reduce the terror threat in Pakistan, and I think recognized in the region as a whole. And I did observe that progress firsthand, and Lisa and I were there a year ago, and we received briefings from politicians as well as military leaders, and I must say we're excited because we're planning on going back this summer again, and we really look forward to future exchanges. As we all know, we have a new administration, and we all have lots of questions on what its policies particularly will be in South Asia. We know, for one thing, that it's committed to battling transnational terrorism, and we know that's a topic on which we share, but there is so much more to the relationship and so much more to be done. We're very excited to have you here today. So it's a brief biography, but I think biographies are very telling, right? And this one I think is probably the most telling biography I have ever read of a speaker. My mother used to say, "Democracy is the best revenge." Bilawal said this in a firm tone when he was made the chairperson of the Pakistani People's Party after his mother was assassinated in 2007. He is the eldest son of 3 children of the former Prime Minister of Pakistan. He was born on the 21st September 1988, and I remark that because I actually have shirts older than that. So I think it's extraordinary that not only do we have a new generation of global leaders on the stage, but a new generation of leaders in extraordinary countries that need new leadership. And I just think it is one of the most remarkable things. He has expressed his desire for his country to become democratic, as the founding father intended it to be, and champion his parents' struggle. And this to me is the most telling thing, and I think this is super important. He was awarded a BA in honors from Modern History and Politics from Oxford University, which I think is okay, except it is the same degree, classification, and percentage as his mother. So he's matched her academically, and he'll probably usurp her politically. So with that, please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. It is an honor to have the opportunity to speak to the best and the brightest minds in Washington, D.C. I have to say that so that you don't ask me any tough questions later. I am grateful to both the United States Institute of Peace and the Heritage Foundation for affording me the time and place. I believe we are all taking stock of the deep change going through our world today. And as I stand here, the fault lines between ideas, nations, and comforting certainties cut through the globe from one end to another. Without a doubt, history will remember this time as a deeply dividing era, where a shared vision of order and interdependence has been replaced by angry nationalism and hard red lines that exclude. This, in my view, must not be the new normal. I say this because this is a worrying moment for Muslim countries, and even more so for the millions dispossessed by conflict and deprivation. The failures of the international order, now in worse disarray than ever before, have left almost a generation without shelter and what I call guaranteed liberties. The spread of terrorism and violent extremism has redefined our lives in ways we could not imagine. With multiple ground zeros threatening to burn down the rubble of our hard-fought freedoms. Such tumult either readies the spine for hard choices or tosses commitment out the door. I, for one, know which side of history some of us will stand. Ladies and gentlemen, we in Pakistan too have fought a very hard fight for our women and men to vote. And we continue another fight now for our millennials and children to breathe air free of insecurity, hate, and extremism. Today, when I see around me a world polarized by dangerous inequalities and tribalisms, it is troubling to see a retreat to the insular as the one defining response to a fear of the unknown and the other. This shrinks the space for moderate, progressive Muslims like myself to fight for open minds and common ground. I speak for one such nation, known and otherized in Washington as both a partner and a frenemy. Many of you with experience and better wisdom know that Pakistan is not one color, let alone a purveyor of terror, which it is often reduced to in a thumbnail sketch of its identity and brand. So when in this great city, my country's image is painted into a monochrome, I worry that perhaps the world has chosen to misjudge us, while we too have not done such a great job of telling our story. What I do know is, in this moment, Pakistan has much to say and contribute. Against a long history of authoritarianism, we as a nation of 200 million people have put our faith in democracy and constitutionalism. Indeed, for many of us, it is not a term that we take lightly. We can't just toss it around as a 5-year process that brings us to power, but instead must nourish it as that very thing that many from my party, my family, the Pakistan People's Party, died defending as the essential flame that lights our path in illiberal times. Without buying into the victim narrative, let me just say that we in Pakistan know what it costs to fight a long war. My mother Benazir Bhutto, Pakistan's twice-elected Prime Minister, led us fearlessly into fighting the next great battle of the millennium. She went into a public campaign against terrorism, and with her face to the sun, went down fighting. This is the price we pay every day in soldier and civilian lives. Yet we have not veered from her heroic path, nor walked away from commitments made to Pakistan. As an emerging democracy, which I'm proud to say my party did the heavy lift on building, we are doing everything in our power to turn a corner. We have, in my father's term, created a new social contract for Pakistan, in the hope of readying it for better governance in the shape of the 18th Constitutional Amendment. This has retooled the Federation to be more fiscally responsive to the needs of the provinces and the people who are still in desperate need of the state's social services. By devolving a decisive chunk of power to the National Parliament and its provincial assemblies, our government paved the way for reviving the broken structures of local governance. But we have a long road ahead of us. I am painfully conscious of all the work we have to do to make a dent in this circle of disrepair our education and healthcare sectors have fallen into. In fact, if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's the state of public health services and the staggering demographic that is still not in schools or remains unemployed after college. I'm not one to oversell our strategic location, but it does pivot us at a unique node of many potential regional collaborations. Yet instead of passing on the dividends of connectivity, we remain trapped in its nemesis, the corrosive flame of conflict. It is indeed a failure of the region's leadership that South and Central Asia is unable to grow its potential as an economic and energy powerhouse. It is also a failure of the international community's stated commitment to peace that we see no great powers rushing to nudge India and Pakistan to resolve one of the oldest disputes on the UN's roster of forgotten flashpoints. I point to Kashmir, which is the most glaring bone of dangerous contention between two nuclear neighbors. While it has become the norm to put it aside as an intractable problem, I see no future of prosperity or stability for the region when hundreds and thousands of Kashmiris are left behind by the march of a manufactured, illiberal consensus of silence. Afghanistan is another place which is crucial to Pakistan's stability. We are very clear that Afghan leaders are the only people who can craft new bargains for their government between the resistance and others. At every point since democratic governments have taken hold in Pakistan, we have strived to bring whatever leverage we have on the Taliban fighters to the table, but it cannot be Pakistan's sole responsibility. Today, we are open to playing any constructive role in Afghanistan's sputtering peace and reconciliation process, as long as Kabul takes the lead. Nothing Islamabad can do will hold as a political bargain if the Afghans are not able to triangulate the leadership of such a deal themselves. It is entirely up to the Afghans to ensure that freedoms gained by women in civil society and constitutionalism are not rolled back. But it looks very difficult for them in the absence of unity in Kabul, security in the rest of Afghanistan, and economic depth to meet the crisis that the United Nations is talking about since last week. For over 30 years, Pakistan has hosted and welcomed Afghan refugees and students. In a world where borders are closing to distressed victims of conflict, we have never closed our doors, even when we could not afford the camps and the fallout of war that followed. Our encounter with America and Afghanistan began in the Soviet jihad, but now we are left alone to fight off its terrible harvest of terror, guns, and extremism. Islamic extremism is not a tap that can be turned on and turned off. It leaves entire countries in chaos, struggling with scant resources to fight off the narrative and the conflict, the guns and the narcotic trade that such wars bring with it. I'm always amazed at the narrow lens through which a country like Pakistan is viewed here in policy circles. And when an impossible task is not completed or ticked off as mission accomplished in a box, we are told that failure came down because we pulled the rug. This is not a serious view of a world undergoing serious conflict, especially where the advance of groups such as Daesh or ISIS, as they are known, is a factor we all have to contend with. Any counter-terror plan or CVE initiative needs sustained partnerships, implicit trust, and a willingness to see the strategic landscape as complex, changing, and long-term. But in Afghanistan, we saw billions of dollars poured down a huge multi-country effort as a long war with no end, with constant shifting goals and strategies. At every point, as a neighbor with an open border, we said, don't do this. Don't play favorites in Afghanistan, because we learned not to do that the hard way. But no one heard us. We were just the partner who could be held responsible when nothing else worked. Afghanistan makes its own decisions, because when someone else does that, whether donor or hegemon, the results are almost always disastrous. Where do we go from here with Pakistan-US relations going through a new cycle? It's a new cycle because I get the sense that we are the dispensable ally once again. All I want to say is that whenever the international community has called on Pakistan to take a stand, at every turn of history, we have given our shoulder to the wheel of joining effort and manpower. But I don't want to make today's intervention about our bilateral relationship, because it will go where it will go. These are uncertain times in America's policy establishment as well. So it's best to see which way the leaves fall. I know you are all eager to hear about what's happening in Pakistan today. We are fighting the largest inland war against terrorism and violent extremism. And it seems that we're doing this entirely on our own. This always has to be a coordinated national effort. And the Pakistan People's Party has always led the fight, even when no one in Pakistan was ready to even to talk about these challenges. We led the military offensive on Swat in the spring of 2009, when the Taliban were advancing in a dangerous new attack on Pakistan's terrain in the north. We were actually able to forge a national consensus in Parliament and jointly take this battle to its logical conclusion. At no point did we imagine it would be over in a decade or even longer. But we never imagined that we would be left to fight it all along our borders, as well as inland, alone. We leave partisan politics at the border, but I do believe that we need to do better on the civilian component of fighting violent extremism. The military has been busy clearing terrain in North and South Waziristan, And in the south, the province of Sindh that my party governs has been fighting back with unprecedented resolve. But we still need clarity and focus on pockets of the Punjab. The famous National Action Plan that all political parties committed to after the heinous attacks on the army public school in Peshawar by the Taliban still needs much work and more resources. It needs the federal government to face off against militants who've gained strength since the days of General Zia-ul-Haq and the Soviet Jihad with more decisive action. This is not the time for anyone to give up fighting this war. And in fact, it is time we took the fight to the next level, which is concerted leadership against extremists, against hate speech, against people who make bargains with militants. It is with this in mind that I say democracy is the answer for Pakistan, where no majorities ever vote in extremist religious parties. But it seems the world is shrinking the space for constitutional protections we all hold dear. We will not tap into hate as a vote getter. We will always strive to fight for protections for women, for minorities, for the most vulnerable, whether they inherit the earth or not. In a planet that is under severe stress by conflict and climate change, I am very clear, for instance, that we have to lead the way in educating our people in the value of Earth's depleting resources. For Pakistan, and even India and Asia, climate change is a very real danger, with my country actually on the front line of recurring natural disasters, flooding, and droughts. As one of the 10 most water-stressed countries of the world, I know Pakistan cannot afford to be cavalier about shared resources. So I hope the current government in India does not repeat its threat of using human entitlements such as water as a weapon. Some of you may recall that one of the world's most successful water treaties actually holds down the distribution agreements between India and Pakistan brokered by the World Bank in the 1960s, enduring several wars as well as a fog of cold peace. Threatening this treaty's abrogation is one example of how extremist postures in the region are failing the people of South Asia, blocking us from realizing our potential as an engine of Asian and global growth. Our sheer population explosion in South Asia, already home to 1/5 of humanity, puts us in no position to normalize the language of war and exclusion as a policy tool. Yet temperatures are rising all round. I know that the world is facing multiple traumas, many of them from economic or social turbulence. Countries such as China are stepping into economic leadership forums in Asia, projecting the kind of soft power that the United States once invented. In Pakistan, we welcome all such investments in our economic growth and hope that this enduring relationship is not seen as a site for great power competition. Without putting too fine a point on it, I do want to say that we in Pakistan are not the problem. In fact, we see ourselves as part of a future where solutions are joint, inclusionary, and sustainable. The United States is our largest trading partner and has been a beacon of freedom and democracy for many of us growing up in a dystopian world. I only hope that this new millennium does not bring with it darker times for the growing world disorder, where humanity is not often seen as a core value, but trumped too often by security as a negotiable sideshow. I honestly believe that it is easiest to be generous when there are no challenges to comfort or peace. A nation's character only gets tested when it's under stress and must make serious choices. It is those choices that will lay out the way we will deal with each other as nations, as states, and as individuals. I'm confident that through the democratic process, despite its imperfections, Pakistan will find its way through the dark. Thank you for listening so patiently. I look forward to interacting with you for the next hour.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bhutto Zardari, for that very comprehensive talk. So what we'll do now is open it up for a moderated conversation. I have a couple of questions of my own, and then we'll open it up for an audience Q&A. As you ask your question, please do identify yourself and keep your question as brief as possible. Questions are better than comments always. Let me begin by asking you, since you talked about it. In this town, there's a lot of concern about the region itself. Nuclear weapons, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Pakistan. Where do we put Pakistan's neighbors? Because as we see it here, apart from China, and I'll come to that, it seems that all other neighbors have some or the other problem in terms of Pakistan's policy radiating instability outside, or at least that's the perception. You mentioned Afghan refugees, and you rightly said that Pakistan hosted them for a long time. I also agree there was catastrophic on the part of an error on the part of the world to let Pakistan loose, if you will, after the Soviet jihad. But what about now? We are seeing Afghan refugees being pushed out. We're seeing the neighbors talk about Pakistan.
Let's talk about the Afghan refugees being pushed out, and that, I think, is not the best approach to dealing with the situation, but it's Mr. Sharif's government, and that's his approach to the situation. And I think that's where it comes back to the foreign policy question. You need a strong foreign policy. There's always going to be issues and concerns and differences that can be addressed when you have that foreign policy leadership back home. Unfortunately, what we've seen over the course of the last couple of years is that each one of our neighbors have our relationship has deteriorated. I mean, I remember during my father's swearing in, Mr. Karzai was there in Pakistan. Our relationships with our neighbors in Iran were far better than they are today. We obviously initiated the CPEC. My father visited China 9 to 10 times when he was president, and he also kept engaged despite difficulties, despite Mumbai and all the things with India. So it requires that leadership, which is lacking at the moment in Pakistan foreign policy, which seems to be all over the place and doesn't have that consistency.
So you mentioned CPEC, and I was a bit struck that you didn't when you spoke, because that's everything one talks about in Pakistan, as we can tell sitting here. There is also a concern on CPEC, even though I would say majority view is that it's very good for Pakistan if Pakistan stabilizes through this infusion of capital. But the question is this being seen in Pakistan as a substitute for the partnership with the US? So if the US partnership doesn't work out, then here is China. Because some of the conversation in the political sphere has been in that stead. And there's some concern in this town, I pick up on that.
I certainly don't see it as that. I mean, it's extremely encouraging that China has stepped up and agreed to invest so much in Pakistan, and working together, especially economically, providing opportunities within Pakistan is a good thing. But we shouldn't see it as exclusionary. I would like all countries to come and invest in Pakistan. I mean, we are, the United States is our largest trading partner, but there's so much more that we could do. And this is a time when the world was looking, it was being more insular. This is post the financial crisis, that we were going everywhere, trying to create a more meaningful relationship between Pakistan and the world that was not just transactions through aid. And we talked even here in the United States about, and in the West, about the Friends of Democratic Pakistan, and in Europe with the GPS Plus status. So there's a lot of things that we worked on, but given the economic restraints in the rest of the world and concerns about extremism, and the way that the rest of the world has sort of used aid or as a bargaining chip rather than as a test of our relationship sort of means that China came out ahead with CPEC.
So I think in some ways linked to that, and I would say this was the same when the Pakistan People's Party was ruling, I think one of the questions raised in this town often is the publicity that China gets in terms of its interactions with Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or other countries versus the US, where the perception of Pakistanis of the US has been, as low as single digits, and now it seems to be around 20-25%, but it's definitely been very negative. For a partner that's invested so much in Pakistan, there's a figure of over 30 billion since 2001. Why is it ultimately that the US does not get credit for that?
I think that if you're looking for credit or this is a sort of transactional relationship, then that's what's going to happen, and that's what's going to trickle through to be seen as, the publicity question is quite interesting, because of late, yes, I think that America is sort of seen as less than it was in its engagements before. But if you remember during the Bush administration and the Musharraf dictatorship, there was a lot of promotion of the Pakistan-US partnership at that time. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, we've given the impression that it's give or take rather than a real relationship. And I think that and I don't think that's true. I think that the Pakistani people and the American people can develop a true partnership. Our students come over here and study at universities. We enjoy this. So there's far more common ground for us to. And if that was pushed, then I think that perception you're talking about.
So perhaps it's too narrowly focused on security for the most part.
Yes, and I think the danger is now that it's going to continue to rather than sort of broaden how we interact with each other, we continue to only focus on that one-point agenda.
Sure. Let me pivot quickly to domestic politics, and you spoke a lot about where Pakistan stands and PPP's sacrifices and stance on democracy. But one of the questions that's often raised is PPP's own governance. Sindh, of course, your party rules the province. Before that, PPP was ruling the national coalition. Same kind of allegation, same kind of question, same kind of, the conversation about weak governance has been there for Sindh as much as it's been for other provinces. Some would argue perhaps even more. Would you argue that the PPP itself has done enough to show the people of Pakistan in terms of governance that it deserves to be back where it was?
Look, there's always more that needs to be done. What the Pakistan People's Party has done is managed to deliver on a whole host of fronts, whether you're interested in the democratic framework in Pakistan, which is a huge, huge step. The 18th Amendment was no joke. It's something that my mother worked for 30 years of her political life, and devolution, and all those sort of institutional constitutional rejigging of the system that devolves power and makes it more close to the people of Pakistan is also important. If you're looking at landmark projects in areas of human development, is where we focus, and we're extremely proud of projects like the Benazir Income Support Program that is hugely successful and lauded all over the world for benefiting the poorest of the poor. So if you talk about governance and you talk about delivery and you talk about those elements, if it's women's rights or minorities' rights, it's like I know that there's lots of room for improvement, not only in governance, but service delivery overall. But I'm proud to say that I know that my government in Sindh stands by the women as equal citizens to men. It stands by minorities in Sindh. We've passed legislation like the Hindu marriage bill and others that takes real and genuine leadership in Pakistan. We've also got a new chief minister who's the youngest and the most highly educated chief minister in Pakistan, who's working around the clock to address that perception in a discrepancy in the way we govern. But I think that we govern through the democratic framework. And the Sharifs have set up their own model. which we will draw a heavy contrast with in the next election. They rely, the CPEC, which we were discussing earlier, is also a big deliverable of the Pakistan People's Party. So it's about framing those things. But there's absolutely there's no taking away from the fact that we have to address governance and service delivery across Pakistan, and I look forward to doing that.
Let me ask you, you mentioned minorities, and that's certainly an area where the People's Party could hold its head high in terms of what you've achieved. Overall, though, minorities remain a serious issue for Pakistan. Every single report or data point you pick up, there's a lot more to be done. Where do you see that going? The bill, absolutely in the Sindh government of preventing forced conversions, absolutely a forward step. But what's next here? How do you break the frontier of...
This has to be consistent leadership on this issue. And that's something that I'm proud of the fact that the Pakistan People's Party has done. What is encouraging now is rather than the hostility that we used to receive for these sort of actions from parties like the more conservative PMLN, is we're now seeing an attempt to incorporate or to try and to follow us on this. So I think if we manage, by taking the lead, to form more of a national consensus around this and ensure that other parties, rather than are proud to do the same things and take the same efforts to treat all citizens as equals, then we'll be able to take this fight forward. But it's a huge, long, uphill challenge that we have to do that's coming under attack from unconventional circles, like from extremists and more religious parties.
Politics. One of the questions always asked about Pakistan is the state of civil-military relations. Given the history, given how the country's democratic trajectory has gone, seems to be much better than it's been in the past in some ways. There seems to be a new normal. The 2008 transition, then the 2013 transition, heading to a 2018 transition. But one of the concerns that people in the intellectual circles have is that unless the political class bands together, unless the political class can work together on key issues, it's very difficult to shift this balance in a sustainable manner towards the civilian sphere. And there, while I think there's been a lot of progress, we've just seen the Pakistani Interior Minister talk a lot in the recent past. You've made some speeches in the past where there seems to be a clear tension still beyond just the opposition's role. Would you say that the political class in Pakistan writ large is maturing in a way that we can see this transition being sustainable and democracy being consolidated, or is there still looking over the shoulder that remains?
I think it's too new for us to stop looking over the shoulder. But as far as the maturity of the political class, I can speak for the 5 years that the Pakistan People's Party led the coalition government, and that was a time you saw that maturity in the political class, where we did come together, putting various differences aside to pass the constitutional amendments required and pushing back against that. Now, that leadership has been lacking from Mr. Sharif. He's not reinvesting in democracy. He's not giving Parliament its due. He's not its due respect by just not turning up. His ministers are not turning up. You mentioned the Interior Minister is reverted back to conversations that sound a lot like good Taliban, bad Taliban. So that's going to obviously aggravate us as the opposition, as we will want to keep the government honest and on topic. And I feel like it's moving off track as far as transparency is concerned, democracy is concerned, and even, unfortunately, its counterterrorism approach.
Just a couple more questions, then we'll open up. I was looking at a recent survey of Pakistanis, and by far, when you ask them what is your number one problem, or Pakistan's number one problem, by far the answer is corruption. Before anything else, terrorism, extremism, poverty, everything comes after that. And that's been something that's been consistent in Pakistan's history, unfortunately, in terms of whether it's democratic governments or otherwise. The Pakistan People's Party has not been immune to this, as haven't other parties. Where do we stand on that? As we speak, we're looking at a Supreme Court, looking at the Panama Gate, if you will, which is a huge sort of scandal surrounding the government. The Pakistan People's Party's time was no different in a lot of ways. Imran Khan, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, agitating. One, what's the future of this? Is this a curse that's going to remain with Pakistan? Or are the Pakistani elite, including political leaders, trying to find a new paradigm out of this?
I don't think that the elite are trying to find a new paradigm out of this, and I think that this issue has been bandied about as a political tool but not been taken seriously, and it is up to the new generation to really stand up and say, actually, we absolutely are not going to tolerate any form of corruption in our society. We have limited resources and we want to see it being spent properly, but that's going to take real, genuine leadership, not bandying it about as a political baton just to hit, which we will continue to do because, let's be real, we're politicians, but we have to really show that leadership on this issue. And unfortunately, there seems, as in a lethargia, it's seen as the way things are done, and that has to change.
Finally, 2018, Pakistan's next election. You are soon going to contest for the Pakistani parliament, if we were to believe the public discourse. A lot of people would argue the People's Party has a very difficult task ahead of it when it comes to 2018. Some would argue you could write PPP off in the next election in terms of reverting to national leadership. Where is PPP? Is this a remaking of the party? Is this a strategic pause? Or do you think people are being too critical and PPP does actually have a chance?
I think that there is a lot of criticism. And there's a lot of work to be done. And it's absolutely an uphill task, and no one's going to deny it's an uphill task. Looking at recent elections around the world, it seems that the unlikely candidate has been winning, whether it's here in the United States or, in Canada. They were in third place before he won. So I'm going to hold on to that as a silver, as part of my silver lining. No, there's absolutely a lot of work that needs to be done. But the Pakistan People's Party is uniquely placed as the only federal party in Pakistan, so we can engage politically, not only in Sindh, but I look forward to putting a really competitive pitch in South Punjab, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where the last 3 by-elections were won by the Pakistan People's Party, in urban Sindh, where the dominating political force for the past many years has been in disarray and disrepair. The second force, which is the Pakistan People's Party, needs to step up and fill in that void. So while people are being extremely critical and viewing the GT Road fight in central Punjab, when elections come down to math at the end of the day, and I think that the Pakistan People's Party, we get our house in order, we're getting our narrative together, we are reorganizing. So that means I've been looking more internally than externally. If I get the time to focus more externally and take our message, have an equal playing field, because if you remember in the last election, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and other extremist forces pointed to Mr. Nawaz Sharif's party and Mr. Imran Khan's party and another party and said, these guys are fine, we're not going to target them, but the People's Party, the ANP and the MQM, we're going to target, so that's not an equal playing field. So things are going to change, hopefully, in that way for the next election, and that'll give us a chance.
On to tougher questions. So let me open it up. Again, please keep your question short, identify yourself, and we'll have our guest respond. And if there's time, we'll come back to our conversation. Let me start back there, and then we'll come down. Wait for the mic, please, to get to you, because there are people on webcast who would like to.
My name is Ihsan Ahmed and I work for Rabba Times. So my question is, you talked about minority rights in Pakistan, and under your government, minorities have been given more religious freedom. But it's also a fact that your party introduced a discriminatory law against the Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan, which basically lets the government persecute the Ahmadis for identifying as Muslims. And they're jailed for identifying as Muslims or reading the Quran. So how does the PPP plan on fixing that legislation?
Thank you.
Great. I'd like to see that we've started with the easy questions here. Pakistan has a lot to answer for in the way that we have treated, as a nation, our minorities. We can go into the past and we can keep talking about what people have done at various points in our history. What I look forward to doing is showing the leadership that's necessary today and coming up with a practical progressive agenda of something, of what we can do and what is achievable. And the People's Party has been focusing on that and really been taking the lead. I look forward to working with other political parties to create an atmosphere of equality amongst all minority communities in Pakistan. It is a long road ahead, and it's not something that's going to be able to take place in one election cycle. But as we continue with our democratization, and as we become competitive on these more soft power issues, where I notice when we pass legislation in Sindh, the Punjab government now comes under pressure to do the same. When we talk about women's rights in Sindh, the Punjab government comes under pressure to do the same. This is the conservative PMLN, Muslim League, Nawaz, that used to try and be the Amir al-Mu'mineen. So I'm seeing a shift in Pakistan's politics towards a positive, more liberal direction. I'm hoping that we'll be able to build a more broader consensus on such issues. There is not that space at the moment.
Sorry, let's sort of go around and we'll come. Wait for the mic, please. The gentleman right here.
Well, let me give you an easy one. So, welcome to Washington once again. And my question is, have you had a chance to interact with the Trump administration? If you did, would you like to share some insight with us?
Could you identify yourself so that the speaker...
Yes, my name is Faiz Rahman, and I'm with the Voice of America. Thank you.
I have not personally had the opportunity to interact with the Trump administration so far.
Right here, in front.
Thank you for being here. I'm Elaine Surrey. I'm the Associate Rector of WIUU. And this is a slightly different direction. It deals with cultural diplomacy. You raised the topic of the importance of regional collaborations and the relationship of the social dynamics in Pakistan. So given that these particularly tenuous times, what is your party's view of the role of cultural diplomacy to foster increased regional stabilization? And I'm going to give an example of something that is in the process. This is the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore. This is a critical site because it was recently at the UNESCO annual national major conference in Istanbul that the Shalimar Gardens were deemed critically in need of this deterioration. And so, and it happens to be that the Shalimar Gardens share a unique heritage between Pakistan and India. The Shalimar Gardens were created at the same time by Shah Jahan when he was also building the Taj Mahal. So given this unique situation, what would you see as your party's encouragement for this kind of cultural diplomacy when we have so few tools maybe at hand immediately? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's such a fantastic question. I think that's exactly the direction in which we need to be looking at to try and find more common ground amongst us and our neighbors. In Sindh, I'm from Larkana, where Mohenjo-Daro is located, and the ancient Indus Valley civilization obviously crosses over. And these are the sort of things that I really hope that we can look at working together on, even not only at a government level, but people to people, and particularly student to student. Because if we invest in these aspects, which we should be proud of as part of our history, part of our culture, part of our shared history and culture, then this is really that area of soft power that one can build that common ground of. Unfortunately, there are not many in government today who prioritize our cultural heritage and our history in the same way. And unfortunately, there are projects that are taking place, particularly in the Punjab, that I've been approached by many people over there who are concerned about the Orange line or train metro that they're building, damaging Lahore's historical cultural sites. So there doesn't seem to be the interest, but it's something that I really hope that our generation can bring to the table. In 2014, the Sindh government held a cultural festival where we attempted to highlight our cultural assets and linked back to the ancient Indus Valley civilization, and tried to put forth the narrative that, look, we're a lot broader than the narrow confines that people describe us as, and not only are we the country Sindh is bubbled Islam and portrayed as how, and we're proud of that part of our history also, but this is also part of our history, and it really is something that not only should we educate our children about so that they know more about it, but we should work with our neighbors on it. I totally agree with you, and thank you so much for the question.
Let's go to the back of the room if we can. The lady there in the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Saima Syal. I'm a South Asian fellow here at the Stimson Center, and I work as a senior research officer at the Center for International Strategic Studies, Islamabad. So, sir, you have talked about the foreign policy agenda and how it's under duress in the current administration. With the upcoming elections and also seeing that you feel differently about how foreign policy should be dealt, may I ask you, how would you, what is your foreign policy agenda, and how would you do it differently in terms of, economic connectivity, in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan and the relations with India and the future of the US-Pakistan relations? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's very important, first of all, to prioritize how one's dealing with their neighbors. And I think one example that I'd like to sort of pick out, because it's a very complicated question, it can go on for a time, would be Iran, and how the Pakistan People's Party government, despite the world's sanctions, knew that Iran was our neighbor and prioritized working together with them on things like the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline that could address both our countries' energy needs. Unfortunately, this government, despite the lifting of international sanctions, has not carried forth that project and really has been seen wanting in its engagement with Iran, who is our neighbor. It's been all over the place in its Indian policy. I feel like the way that they've gone about dealing with Modi does not address the insecurities of Muslims in Pakistan and the region to his Hindu nationalist rhetoric, but his unconventional way of going about it and is a cause for concern. At the same time, we've had CPEC, which was supposed to be articulated or implemented in a way that would be perceived to be prioritizing the areas that are most highly impacted by terrorism in the most deprived areas of Pakistan. Again, by putting on expensive train projects in Lahore before you deal with water in Gwadar, it makes things like that controversial. So what I would like to see the government do is prioritize the way in which it deals with its neighbors, have a strong and more articulated foreign policy, and actually have a minister maybe, so he can, give a full time to this very important component. And I think that's where you've seen us sort of step back on this front under the current administration.
Okay. Gentleman here. I'm going randomly, there are so many hands, and I'm going to try to get to everyone. Yes.
My name is Amar Malik. I'm a research associate at the Urban Institute here in Washington. There is a policy debate in Pakistan, especially in the Punjab, about big infrastructure projects in cities. You mentioned the Orange Line, but the government has just launched its third bus rapid transit. And the debate is that, there's a trade-off between spending money on doing these big ticket projects versus fixing schools and healthcare systems, which you seem to be passionate about. My question is, where do you stand on this debate? And more broadly, what is your pitch to the Punjab people, especially the young people of the Punjab, since you represent the youth and the new generation in Pakistan?
I mean, it's a very important fault line. It's not only that it's spending on big ticket items like this, but it's the amount of spending. We've got bus rapid projects in the pipeline at a fraction of the price. In Sindh, for example, the ED line that will be coming up soon is done at a fraction of the price per meter than the Lahore Metro bus. I don't understand how they're going about doing that, because obviously transport is an important issue for any urban center, but the way in which you spend your resources is also important. My pitch to the Punjab would have to address those that I feel are left out of the patronage networks and the way things work over there. I think that it's going to be a difficult task because it is a triangular fight, but the two other competing parties are competing for the same space on the right, and it will be a test to see how much a more progressive voice would be able to make inroads in what is seen as a traditionally more conservative voting electorate in Punjab.
Okay. Let's go back to the back of the room. The lady there, right? Yes, you, ma'am. No, you look, yeah, right here, please.
Hi, my name is Khushbacht, and I'm a graduate student. And my question is actually a follow-up question to the first question that was asked. And you said that Pakistan has treated its minorities badly and how you hope that this will change. But does the PPP take responsibility for the institutionalization of discrimination against Ahmadis? And if so, what do you plan to do to change it? You said that Punjab looks to Sindh for legislation, so will you do anything about it?
I don't mean that Punjab looks to Sindh to legislation. I think that it takes a lot of bravery and leadership to break out of what is become a vicious cycle of otherization in Pakistan, and where there's a complete and utter lack of empathy of treating people as equal, not treating your fellow human beings as equal citizens. I understand there's a lot of not only criticism but debate around this incredibly controversial topic, and the Pakistan People's Party as well. I mean, I think it was unanimous, all the political parties that played a role in this really need to have a more open debate about it. Do you believe that we have an atmosphere in Pakistan at the moment, or do I believe, should I say, that we have an atmosphere in Pakistan that encourages that open debate and would not result in the death of anybody who takes divergent views on this particular issue? I don't think we're there yet. I do hope that your and my generation will get to a point where we can have a more open, honest debate about this topic. Thank you so much for your question.
Gentleman right here. And then we'll go back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for...
Could you hold the mic closer to you, please?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your enlightening speech. I'm Dr. Hossein Bour, the chairman of American Baloch Council. And of course, I agree with your view that the only solution is democracy. But of course, I'm also aware that your party has not stated any position condemning the atrocities committed in Balochistan by the army and ISI, which are still ongoing. And of course, the issue of Balochistan cannot be resolved unless it is done through what you describe, a democratic solution. And that is exactly what happened in UK when you were there. Scottish nation wanted independence. They held a referendum, and the issue was resolved. The Scottish people said they want to stay in UK. Why not apply the same standard to Balochistan, especially after all this bloodshed which has been going on? And of course, the principle of civilian control over the military is the basis of democracy. And I know that your family, your great-grandfather, I remember, lost his life trying to do that.
Thank you.
We're working towards exactly that transition. And I, amongst others, have the same sort of impatience and urgency for everything to be done now. And I hope to translate that urgency into more effective action. There has been a transition, and I think the key step that's taken place is not only the overall sort of Pakistan's transition towards democracy, but with the devolution of power and the more resources available to the provincial governments, I'm really hopeful that this is exactly the sort of way that we can address such issues. As far as human rights violations are concerned, anywhere across in Pakistan, whether it's the most recent bloggers issue or you name it, the Pakistan People's Party is the first to stand up and put our necks on the line and take the controversial stance that others may not be willing to take. Does that mean that every single day I stand up and down like protesting. I believe that I'm focusing on what is practical and what is possible, and I leave the activism to the activists and the politics to the politicians. But as far as Balochistan is concerned, I worry that despite the progress we've made, we're not bringing it into the mainstream. We're not discussing it as much as one should discuss. It's not part of your national news cycles. The issues of Balochistan, beyond even the controversial issues, we don't discuss the lack of human resources, the lack of development, the lack of investment in infrastructure, in the education system, in the healthcare system. I visited Balochistan recently. The security situation makes it difficult for national leaders to do so consistently, and it's a serious, serious challenge.
Lady behind.
Yes, Jamie Aziz with DC Global Television Network. And my question is, the White House currently instituted a ban on immigration from 7 majority Muslim nations. And the US media has been very critical of this, often bringing up the fact that no terrorists have come from those nations and attacked the United States. But then they also point to Pakistan as a nation where terrorists have come from and attacked the United States. And then they say, well, why isn't Pakistan on the list? So my question to you is, does that concern you? Are you worried that there will be pressure put on the White House to add Pakistan to the list? And what are you doing to reassure the administration that you are a partner and not to be added to the list?
Thank you so much, ma'am. I have been sort of watching and monitoring very closely what seems to be extremely controversial decision by the current administration. And for my generation, as a progressive Muslim out in the world, it's really disencouraging to see countries responding to fear of the other in such a way, and that we've learned through history is not the way to deal with such issues. I know by interaction, by finding common ground, by studying in other people's universities, by learning about their culture, our shared culture, history, we find that common ground, and a few criminals should not be allowed to spoil the situation for everyone. And it is very discouraging for those out there in the Muslim world fighting radical extremism, because people put their lives on the line on a daily basis to do so, to fight for what they believe in, not American ideals of freedom, for their ideals in freedom and equality, in democracy. And to be tarred with the same brush with those who have brought our religion into disrepute, who trade in violence and discrimination is discouraging, demotivating. But at the same time, I'm an eternal optimist, and I really am extremely encouraged that I've seen another side to America. And the outpouring of support for the people affected by this ban and some other things, I think is a very positive message that's sending to the world. And I do hope that this issue is sorted out very soon, because it is sending the wrong message and is shrinking the space for those of us out there fighting Islamic extremism on the front lines. And I feel for my fellow citizens of all these countries who have been thrown into chaos through these actions.
Dr. Nisar Chaudhry, right here.
Thank you very much, Moeed. It's a pleasure to listen to you, Bilawal, and your message. I had this distinctive privilege that your beloved mom was Muharrama Benazir Bhutto had been my guest and stayed and came to our house 6 times. She will always be loved and remembered as a legend by the people of Pakistan. I would like to echo Moeed's feeling that USA does give so much to Pakistan. And where is the fault line? Is it the approach of USA? They need to review the way they help Pakistan, or it is the failure of Pakistani leadership to educate their people so that they can appreciate how much USA is doing. And part B of my question is that when PPP was ruling and now Muslim League Noon is ruling, what is the difference in the context of US-Pakistan relations you see between the policies of the PPP and the policies of Muslim League Noon? Thank you.
I think it's been a failure on both sides. We've been unable to show the broad length of our partnership. And instead of it devolving into a more, what have I done for you, what have you done for me, we don't talk about what we've done for each other. But I think that this is going to have to be, it's going to have to take the course that it does take now. There was a lot of high hopes that the Pakistan-US relationship would improve, and I still hold those hopes, but the sort of rhetoric, actions, perceptions created in the media makes it very difficult for those of us in Pakistan who perhaps would like to champion the benefits of our relationship when we're pointed to these more corrosive messages that are coming out there. As far as our government was a coalition government of all political parties, and we worked within those restrictions to deliver to the best of our ability. Mr. Nawaz Sharif enjoys a 2/3 majority, but for some reason has still been frustrated in his ability to deliver. And I think that's the key difference between our two governments.
Let's go here, right at the corner, then I'll come back. Welcome.
Hi, Marlene Davis with Motorola Solutions. It's good to see you again, sir. I want to take it a little bit into the business side of the discussion. And you mentioned that the US is a major trading partner with Pakistan. And US companies always look to collaborate and work on projects, potential projects in Pakistan. But and US companies generally develop, I know Motorola Solution does, develop the community where we actually do work. So my question is, with the CPEC and the relationship with China, frequently US companies face issues with where the Pakistan government gives not preferential treatment, but preference to cost over value-added projects. In other words, when there is a tender, the cost is the main issue, not the value add. My question to you is, do you see, and knowing that we should keep business separate with business people and policy with policy people, I want to know if you see the Pakistan government doing any practical, progressive agenda to actually give value to value-added.
Thank you.
That is actually a serious question of concern, because the way that our rules work, it goes down to what's the cheapest to the lowest price bid. And we really need to sit together to see how we can talk about value added, because it comes back to the questions about a perception of corruption and discrepancies, and that has to be fought against when there's a higher price. But we really do. I don't think the government has done enough to address this issue. In fact, I think it's relied on this to get its pet projects through. But it is value added. It really needs to be appreciated and worked into our legal framework for it to have the impact. Because politically, there's a lot of pressure always anyway to go for for the cheapest option available. And we have to find a way to quantify the other value-added things that are being brought along for that extra cost.
The lady there? Right here. Yes. I actually pointed to you earlier as well. Go for it.
Thank you. My name is Abiha Bilgrami, and I am with the local DC Justice for Muslims Coalition. And my question is, you said your party supported legislation about the Hindu marriage bill, has taken controversial stances in the past, and you don't want to talk about the past regarding minority issues because it's in the past. What about the forced conversion bill that is in the last 2 months? Why did your party support it and then back down from it? Especially because it's a very important issue. Forced conversion is something the religion does not allow either.
Absolutely. Forced conversion is something that the religion does not allow. The way that this entire issue was handled, I think, was handled botched by all sides, and it actually was a different party's bill that was adopted and brought on by the government. The phrasing was done in such a clumsy manner that it had to be readdressed. But it doesn't take away from have you read the bill? The forced conversion bill? I'd advise that you look at the original format, and it's very difficult within the Muslim context and within Pakistan's context of explain. You have to be very careful of how you word legislation, particularly when you're looking to protect minority rights. And if you could do anything to aggravate the situation or to cause a backlash, and when you're not in a position then to defend it, it is very important to take all stakeholders on board, which is what the government did. But also, there was very little they could do within their power when the government had sent it back. So now we have to sit together to make sure that we all are on the same page. I do believe that you will find it hard to find anyone in Pakistan who advocates and pushes a progressive agenda on all fronts, not only on minority fronts. And I'm happy to have a debate on the most controversial issues with you in person. And I'd challenge any other political party to take the lead that we've done. I understand that we take the hits for people that criticize us for what has happened in the past. And I hope to be able to prove by my actions and by what we deliver that the Pakistan People's Party is truly the only progressive political party in Pakistan.
Right here in the middle, Anwar.
Thank you very much. I'm Anwar Iqbal. I work for Pakistan's Dawn newspaper. And part of the question was already asked, but anyway, I'll try again. Basically, Mohit talked about the concerns that people in this town have about Pakistan. But I wanted to ask you about what are the apprehensions in Pakistan about the decisions taken in this town, particularly what the Trump administration is going to do, how it's going to deal with this, with our region. And what would be the impact on the war against terror if Pakistan was added to the list of the 7 banned countries?
I think that there's a lot of uncertainty both in this town and externally about what the future policies are going to be. And I'd like to hold on to a wait-and-see approach. As far as the ban is concerned, I believe that it only has detrimental effects on the countries that are included, and if that was to extend to Pakistan, it would create a whole host of hostilities, but also would be a very negative indicator that the United States is turning away from those very ideals that it stood for as that shining example on the hill. It may not have been perfect all the way through, but it could stand by those ideals. And I just hope that this is not the new normal.
So we're coming to the closer time. I'm going to have one last question and then give you the last word. Right here. Sorry, let me just come here. The gentleman right here. Yes. Okay, you and then the one behind that I pointed to.
Thank
Please.
you, sir. My name is Nasir Naveed. I have been associated with Middle East Institute previously. My question is about Jamaat Dawa. Is there any possibility that your party table a resolution in the National Assembly and pass a resolution in Sindh province to ban Jamaat Dawa in Pakistan, because it is considered that as a bone of contention between India and Pakistan?
We have to deal with all such organizations in a far more firmer way than they're being dealt with right now. I don't know how constructive a Sindh resolution on this front would serve, other than to paint a big target on the backs of a minority who's not even in charge of the government of the country. And it is really the responsibility of those in power to take the decisive action that they seem blatantly not to be doing. In fact, to be showing favorites to certain organizations that are in disrepute given the activity that they are engaged in.
The last question.
Bob Hathaway at the Wilson Center here. We've asked you a lot of policy-related questions. I hope you'll allow me to ask you a personal question. Many of us in this room knew your mother. Many of us regarded her as a friend. Can you describe to us how she has influenced you? What lessons her life holds for you? And also what cautions? Which of her failings or her shortcomings or her limitations have also helped you as you've thought about your place in Pakistan in the years ahead?
Thank you for the question. My mother's inspired and influenced my life in a whole host of ways, but I think the one that I'd sort of like to draw the attention to right now would be her leadership within Pakistan and the Muslim world while being a woman. And I watched how she had to work twice as hard and take undue criticism, sexist criticism that undermined her leadership and her position just on the basis of that. And that is why I'd like to see Pakistan treat its men and women equally and provide equal opportunity to all girls in Pakistan so they can achieve their potential. That my mother, because she came from privilege and from status, that she could overcome certain things that the average Pakistani cannot. But if you look at the women's representation in parliament, the number of tickets that people are giving, including the Pakistan People's Party are giving to women, it's not enough. And I see that post-Benazir Bhutto's Pakistan has a shrinking space for women, and that is something that one really needs to address. And it's something that, because I witnessed that unfairness firsthand, I'm committed to. And others saw it as a limitation or a hindrance, and I saw how sheer force of will she refused to accept it as a limitation. Thank you.
Well, it only remains for all of us to thank you. We're right on time. Usually we're on South Asian time whenever we end. Let me just end by saying that this is the third time we've hosted you here. It's been a pleasure every time. You were here a time before that as well, and I can remind you, but you were here last year as well. It's always a pleasure. I also want to recognize Ambassador Sherry Rahman, former Pakistan ambassador to the US, who's accompanying you and has spoken, has been a great friend of the Institute. So once again, thank you very much, and do come back again. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, everyone. Such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats.